everybody. Today I want to talk with you about fiction 1945 to the present. And so if you want to follow along with me on the course document, you can, as always, go to content and then course documents and then fiction 1945 to the present. I'll be, as always, telling you what aspects of the sheet might later haunt you on a quiz or on the final exam. So here's the basic overview. The fiction that came out of World War II, 1939 to 1945, lacked the desire to shock that had sort of energized previous war novels, and writers seemed to be able to regard armed conflict with more of a sense of philosophical detachment, if you will. But after the explosion of that first atomic bomb at the end of the war, America and the world entered into a new era. And so the possibility of mass destruction weighed heavily on the collective consciousness, as you can imagine. This idea, again, of individuality, its negative consequences, as well as its transcendent powers, became a unifying principle of American lit following World War II, and we really saw that with modernism. Similarly, you had all the protest movements of the 1960s, and that led to a remarkable diversification of perspective and expression in American lit later on in the 20th century. We, of course, know that among the greatest forces for social change in the 1960s was the civil rights movement, the student movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, the beginning of the gay rights movement, and the environmental movement. And each of those movements, to varying degrees, changed our culture and our way of thinking, and thus our way of writing. A few voices outside of the mainstream, whether by virtue of style or point of view, had always played some role in our literature. But after the 1960s, it became more and more difficult to sort of define what the mainstream was. Now, I just have to tell you that back at Eastridge High School, we had a sit-in one day, and so all over the country they were holding sit-ins, but it was for a worthwhile, incredible cause, usually, like to stop racism and that sort of thing. Well, we were East Ridge, we were just like out in the boonies of the godforsaken armpit of the redneck world, and we just didn't know anything about what was happening. All we knew that people were having sit-ins, and that was cool, and we wanted to be cool, so we didn't have a cause. So we at a certain time on a certain day, we all agreed that we were going to just drop our books in the floor and go outside to the place where we played football and just sit down and just do nothing. And that was our sit-in, and no cause, no signs, no reason to protest other than we just wanted to get out of class. All right, so the period of time from the end of World War II, 1945, up until roughly the late 1960s, early 70s, saw the publication of some of the most popular work in American literature history, like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. That's a classic example. The last few of the more realistic modernists, along with the wildly romantic beatniks, largely dominated that period, while the direct respondents to America's involvement in World War II contributed as well. So the 1950s was the Beat generation. And after the war, a group of American writers were referred to as the Beat generation, and they communicated their dissatisfaction with contemporary society. It's interesting how each group kind of does that after a certain point through their unconventional writings and lifestyle. This is what sort of set the beatniks apart. So you had notable writers associated with this group like Kerouac and Burroughs, Ginsberg. Their writing was characterized by this sort of improv, raw kind of quality. They wanted to, again, liberate writing from its formal concerns and plot, often drawing on their own personal experiences. And the best known, I think, beat novel is Kerouac's On the Road, which is semi-autobiographical. It celebrates direct sensory experience and freedom from everyday responsibilities. So think hippie movement, if you know anything about that. Flower children, if you know anything about that. In East Ridge, we tried to dress up like hippies and flower children. We would put, flowers in our hair and try to look cool, but we really did not have the foggiest clue of what really that was all about, which might have been a good thing in the end. So now we come to postmodernism, and there will be a question on the final exam about it. And here's what you want to remember. Its exact parameters are debatable, but from the early 1970s to the present day, the most salient literary movement has been postmodernism, so the most significant one. And Thomas Pynchon, who was kind of a practitioner of the form, drew in his work on modernist fixtures such as temporal distortion, so distorting time, unreliable narrators, so narrators where you're not really sure whether they're telling you the exact truth about things or not. Interior monologue, so you're hearing the thoughts of the character. And then he coupled them with postmodern techniques like metafiction, unrealistic names, absurd plot elements, humor that's hyperbole, it's sort of over the top, use deliberately of anachronisms. Remember, we talked about anachronisms within Journey of the Magi, and archaisms, strong focus on post-colonial theme, and this merging of high and low culture. So we're not looking at Pynchon, but what I want you to remember about modernism in terms of temporal distortion, unreliable narrators, interior monologue, is just that those techniques are structured to be as follows. So for example, in one chapter, I may be in the present time, and then suddenly in the next chapter, we're 30 years in the future, or 200 years in the future, or 200 years in the past. That's temporal distortion. Unreliable narrators. So the narrator may be naive, may just not know what's really going on, or may be deliberately telling you an untruth like a real living human, and it's up to you to figure this out. So it makes the reading more interesting. In terms of metafiction, which is a postmodernist technique, this is where fiction, work that is creative, it's not factual, becomes conscious of itself, right? So think about that. That's a postmodern technique. And then these unrealistic names, and so you'll see that in a lot of postmodern literature like Benny Profane, and you see it in Flannery O'Connor, Manly Pointer, you see these absurd names. So African American postmodernist writing is, to my mind, one of the most interesting genres. I am absolutely in love with the writing of Toni Morrison, who wrote Beloved. If you have not read it, read it. It's a ghost story. It's fabulous. And there's also a film that Oprah Winfrey produced and starred in of the same name, which is just wonderful. Toni Morrison was a recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature, and she had a very distinctive lyrical kind of prose style. So she's not writing poetry, but it's lyrical, it's beautiful, it's musical, it feels like poetry. Her debut novel was The Bluest Eye, and it came on the heels of the signing of the Civil Rights Act in 1965. And since then, she's experimented a lot with lyric fantasy, with Song of Solomon and with Beloved. And she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for fiction there. So Beloved was chosen in a 2006 survey conducted by the New York Times as the most important work of fiction in the last 25 years. And I just, again, encourage you to read Beloved and to watch the film if you ever have the chance. So thanks for listening. This is a long period of time that we're kind of ending with here at the end of the semester, and sadly we don't have a lot of time to indulge in some of the great readings from this time period. But the one that I've chosen for you is A Christmas Memory. And it's up under the Readings tab online for you. It is absolutely amazing. I've also given you a link to a film version of A Christmas Memory by Truman Capote that will just melt your heart. So if you get a chance over the holiday season to watch that film that is based on Truman Capote's writing of the same title, please do. Thanks so much.